Now, the Somalia order, which is from October of 1993, Colonel Peter Myers, Dr. Peter Myers wrote it as we were getting ready to use uranium in Somalia and Africa in 93, and again required a radiobioassay within 24 to 72 hours of exposure. Not days, weeks, months, or years later, within 24 to 72 hours. And the reason for that is what we do know, and we wrote the medical directives, is that if you wait until after 30 days post-exposure, in other words, if you today, whatever today is, we waited 30 days to start the radiobioassay. The radiobioassay won't detect what your body actually got hit with, because what's mobile now in the urine is less than 1/1,000th of what actually was in the body. So in other words, they delay the testing, and therefore there's nothing there to be found, and therefore there was no exposure. This was a deliberate decision, deliberate act that was made many times, and then Dr. Bernard Rotzker and Dr. Michael Kilpatrick formalized it along with Colonel Bob Cherry, Colonel Eric Jackson, and Colonel Mark Mellinson from the U.S. military. So we have all of these problems coming along. No two ways about it. Absolutely identified. There's probably been a dozen medical orders. And the other thing we need to know is when we require the medical care and medical orders for our own military by Geneva Convention under God, we have to provide the same medical care to everybody we expose, which is millions upon millions of people. So the orders are there to do it. Now, the most recent orders were written by General Peake, who was a previous Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, and General Eric Shinseki, who is the current Director of the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. So the two past secretaries of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs and the last president are the officers that wrote the orders mandating medical care, immediate medical care for DU exposures. And it doesn't happen. And to me, that's unconscionable. And my continuous phone calls to them meet with silence.
When they come in wanting medical treatment, they're told, you're just mentally ill, here, take some Prozac.
That's exactly correct. They give them the Prozac and the psychotropic drugs, and they ignore the medical problems, even though they know exactly what the medical problems are. And then what next thing we know is we've got the suicides, and we got the family destruction, and we've got all the crime rates and everything else. And I'm tired of dealing with it. Now, once you use uranium munitions, the Army Regulation 700-48, Section 2-4 is very, very specific what must be done. Now, this Army regulation I wrote, but General Eric Shinseki, who is now Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, signed off on it as a commanding general, making it mandatory. So what we do know must be done wherever uranium munitions are used. Quote, as soon as exceptional risk permits, the Corps Joint Task Force Division Commander, Radiation Safety Officer will identify, segregate, isolate, secure, and label all radiologically contaminated equipment. Procedures to minimize the spread of radioactivity will be implemented as soon as possible. That's every place, okay? We have to bring explosives ordnance disposal use, the explosive experts in there. And during Desert Storm, EOD guys wouldn't go near it. I finally got 3 guys trained up for it, and they got killed at Camp Doha, and I still got their medals and, their certificate for medals in my briefcase. They were given posthumously, but didn't do a lot of good. The explosive ordnance disposal units will render all the equipment safe, because when this is used, we have incredible, not only radiological and chemical toxicities, but we have all the explosives hazards. So that has to be done. We continue on. Every mother, father, son, sister, daughter, brother, child of anybody in the military old enough to read needs to understand this. Quote, the unit team, individual responsible for equipment, whether friendly or foreign at that time or damaged, is responsible for taking all action consistent with this regulation and the Army pamphlet 700-48 that I also wrote. That's the down and dirty procedures. That's the cookbook of what you do. Quote, all equipment to include captured or combat radiologically contaminated equipment will be surveyed, packaged, retrograded, and decontaminated, and then released in accordance with the technical bulletin that you cited a moment ago, 1300-278, the pamphlet 700-48, and all the other relevant guidance that we put together. We contaminated not only Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the Balkans, Somalia, Afghanistan, but Vieques, Hawaii, Indiana, Florida, Nevada, California, Washington State. And the thing that bothers me the most, and I think, you've done history and everything, and I think everybody remembers this. On the 18th of April, hardly a man is left alive that doesn't remember what? Paul Revere's ride?
Yes.
Concord, Massachusetts, where our nation was born, is one of the most highly depleted uranium-contaminated cities in the world because of the Starmet plant. It is a national environmental disaster where the military is trying to clean it up. Albany, New York is also the same thing. Jonesboro, Tennessee is the same thing. I mean, these are totally contaminated areas because of uranium emissions with incredible medical problems. And we see the same thing in Hawaii. Schofield Barracks out there in Hawaii, pristine environment where the U.S. military did nuclear weapons testing with Davy Crockett's and DU munitions, totally illegal, and left the contamination. And now, as we speak, right now, I got an email not even a few minutes ago before we came on. It's a mess, and they're refusing to take care of it. Okay, so what we've got is use uranium munitions in testing and manufacture and everything else. Then we had to use uranium munitions in combat operations, which has left wholesale contamination throughout. Now, when we use uranium munitions against either armor or any vehicles, we shoot it up. It just totally destroys it, totally contaminates it. The Army regulations, again, 700-48 and the Army Common Task Training require that you wear full protective equipment when you go near it. That's a gas mask with the HEPA filter, which is not going to do a whole lot of good, and then protective clothing, special clothing, so you don't get it out of your clothes. So you got all that contamination, everything that's crossed over.